Guys, I think we're up to a good number. So let's kick it off. And for those who are still joining, that's great. You can just join us as we go. But I think again, thank you very much for your punctuality and a warm welcome to this webinar today on goal setting. I see that the chat is open now. I was missing that. So thank you for your comments. It's like the weather is good all around. That's good news. Hot in Joburg as well. Okay, good. I'm just catching up on all of it. Dying of heat in Pretoria, Vilan says. Jonathan, also very hot in Pretoria. Okay, it looks like we're having good weather all across the country. What a thing. Volpus Bay, Viho, also a bit cloudy though. Okay. Sunny in Eswatini, great. And hello to Letitia in Namibia. Hot in Soweto. Okay, great. Well, we've got a very good idea of what the weather's doing all around. Samantha, yes, we will be recording the webinar as we go. It will be available to everybody. So just by way of introduction, my name is James Sturdy. I am a registered psychological counselor with the Health Professions Council. I've been a registered counselor for the last, I have to do the math now because it's the new year, it's 2023. I registered in 2010. So for the last 13 years, I've been practicing. And you would think I'd be well practiced by now. But here we are in 2023. I have been with Regent for the last probably 7 years now. Again, having to do some quick math to do that in 2023. I've been with Regent Business School for the last 7 years. I do all the student and staff counseling, and I do workshops as well. And I'm also in private practice in Morningside in Durban. So yeah, some of the things that I'm interested in, and some of the things that I work with in my practice are soft skills development, so things like goal setting, but other workshops and other topics that we'll discuss as we go through the workshop series, things like emotional intelligence and critical thinking, communication skills and boundary setting and assertiveness. I work a lot with things like anger management and stress management. I'm very interested in topics such as self-compassion and emotional regulation. I work a lot with couples as well. These are the main things that keep me busy during the day. So I hope that I'll be able to share some of my experience with you guys, but also more than that, just to give you a bit of an idea of what the current science is saying on these topics, and specifically today on goal setting. So thank you again for your chat. I am going to try keep an eye on the chat as we go. I will set aside some time for Q&A towards the end of this webinar. We have an hour blocked for us, so I'll finish a bit before that. It's not a particularly long webinar. We'll finish before then and open up for Q&A. But having said that, I'm always very happy to take any comments and questions as we go, because I do like to have as interactive a session as possible. And I know that's not always easy in an online forum, but I think we can try to simulate it as well as we can. Victor's saying unbearably hot in Britain, northwest. I can only imagine as you go up country up north how warm it's getting. Okay, great. Well, I hope it's going to be a helpful workshop. Some of the things we're going to speak about today you would have heard of. Goal setting is a very it is a very expansive topic. There have been hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of articles written on it. There's been a huge amount of research that's been done on it in the last 50 years in a whole number of different disciplines, economics, psychology, to business management and everything in between. So it is a very well traveled landscape, let me put it that way. And again, some of the things you would have been exposed to, but hopefully we can talk about it in a way that's going to be helpful and bring some fresh and new insights to it. If you have any experience with goal setting and the field of goal setting academically, you will know that a big part of it is acronyms. People in the goal setting space love to use acronyms. You might have heard of things such as SMART goals and ABC goals. I'm going to stay away from those today, not because they're not useful. I think they can be useful, but I think that information is really out there, accessible to everybody. If you're interested in it, you can go look it up. I'm going to try to steer away from those acronyms that we always kind of speak about when we're speaking about goal setting, and try to speak about things hopefully that are going to be relative and relevant, I should say, and then to the point. Okay, so let's get started. Just whilst we're at it, before we really get into the meat of the webinar, take a moment right now just to think about your own goal setting. And this is a good time to be doing it, right? At the beginning of a new year, as we close off 2022 and begin 2023, if you were to think back over the course of 2022, how successful were you at meeting your personal goals, 1 to 10, one being not very, it didn't go very well. There was a lot of failure, a lot of goals you set at the beginning of the year kind of fell away. Maybe you can't even remember the goals that you set. 10 meaning you actually were able to really achieve all of the goals that you set for yourself. I'm going to put that number in the chat just to give us an idea of what we're working with. Okay, I've got a 7 and a 6. Gringo 6, Villain 6, 4, Ari 7, Dane 3, Ranley 10, Dominant 6. Okay, so we're getting a variation there from about 3 to 7, mostly congregated around 5 or 6. That tells us something, doesn't it? With a few outliers. I'm very interested in the people who are saying 8, 9, 10. I feel like I should perhaps be handing over the mic to you, because those are some impressive numbers. Okay, good. Yeah, it's a good range there. A good range. Probably congregating around 6 or 7 seems to be the mean, the average there. That most people are reflecting on, that they were able to achieve their goals to some extent, but not very much. And then some of you lower, some a bit lower, some a bit higher. Very interesting. And I think that tells us something about goal setting and how, as common as it is, and much as it's often front of our mind, especially this time of year, how we're often not able to actually actualize it, right? And this is the thing about goal setting, is that you actually don't need a workshop on goal setting. You need a workshop on goal achieving. So that the process of setting goals in many ways, and not to be too reductionist or simplistic about it, but the process of setting goals is actually the easy part. When we set the goal itself, we can do that without too much difficulty. It's down the line when the reality kicks in and we're having to now actually do the work to achieve the goal. That's when we often lose it. And that's what we're going to explore a bit today as we go through this. Great. Seeing a few more numbers. Vanelli 4, Suzanne 8. Okay. Yeah. Keeping with that distribution. So why goal setting? Number of simple reasons. You have the quote from Tony Robbins there. Setting goals is the first step in turning the invisible into the visible. And there's something about that I think that is profound, which is we have these ideas in our head that aren't reality about how we would like our lives to look and what are the things we would like to achieve and what we'd like our future self to look like, and what our future self, what type of life and what type of environment that future self might be inhabiting, what type of relationships that future self might be in. But those are just ideas. The process of goal setting is turning those ideas that we have and those visualizations into actual reality. And there's some alchemy or some magic about that, perhaps. So the research on this is unequivocal. It's really clear. If you are able to set goals successfully, you are much more likely to be successful. I don't think that would surprise anybody to be aware of that. And again, I'm using setting goals as also short for doing the work to achieve the goals as well. But before we achieve it, we have to be able to set it. So setting goals increases the likelihood of success, but to change that around, which is similar but not the same, successful people are actually more likely to be effective goal setters as well. So goal setting increases success. But if we take a cross section of people who have achieved success in different areas of their lives, and their professions, and their domains, we find that more often than not, they are effective goal setters. And goals are a very important aspect of living an examined, intentional life. Living an examined, intentional life means we take off autopilot and we are mindful about the choices that we make in our lives. Because it's very easy. Life is hard enough as it is. It's very easy to go through life just getting through the day, right? And eating what we want and going to sleep when we want and spending our time in a not a very conscious way. Living an examined life means we take a step, we're reflective, we zoom out, we think about our life generally, we think about the implications of the choices we make for ourselves and for others, for our communities, for our environment, and we think about what the implications of those choices are. That's what it means to live an examined, intentional life. And goal setting is a very important aspect of that structure. Okay. So it's very important to determine what it is that we actually want. That has a couple of different areas to it. It can be health related. What do I want with regard to my health? This is related to fitness as well. What do I want to look like? Be aesthetically. How do I get there? Career-wise, my professional trajectory. What do I want that to look like? Where do I want to be in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? Family life. What type of family life do I want to have? Is family important to me? Is having children important to me? And just keeping an eye on seeing a hand going up, but I don't think it's just a greeting. Welcome everybody once again. Thank you to everyone who came in a little bit later. Just a quick catch up. I'm James. So about family life, also lifestyle. Lifestyle is something slightly different to this. How do we want our lives to look? Is it about travel? Do we really want to spend our time and our resources traveling, or do we want to focus them on other areas? Is it about doing things having experiences that we enjoy, maintaining, building relationships? And again, what does the medium to long term plan look like? Very importantly, and this is something we often overlook, is our goals have to align with our core values. So I'm not sure how many of you ever stop and think about these type of questions. What are my core values? It's something that often we're prompted to think about, but again, it's not necessarily something that we're ever taught to question, right? If you're talking about core values, you're really just talking about the things that are important to you. What is valuable to you? What type of things in your life matter to you? For some people, it might be honesty and integrity. A core value is that I really feel like I want to be honest with people around me. I want to live an honest life. Integrity. I want the people in my life who are important to be honest back with me. That's the core value. It might be making the most of my life. I want to look back at the end of my life and feel like I've really lived, like I've done really exciting things. It might be relationships. I want to feel that I have meaningful relationships in my life. Family might be a core value. Friends might be aligned with our core values as well. It might be satisfaction in life and success and money, and to think I want to make the most of the opportunities that are available to me. I want to realize my potential. Whatever these core values are, living a happy life, for example, a meaningful life, purpose, whatever they are, they have to align with our core values. And if we set goals that aren't aligned with our core values, very often we're going to find ourselves stuttering and failing and falling short of those, because when the going gets tough, we often start to lose the why, the meaning of it, the purpose of it. And we can ask ourselves, well, what's the point of this? Why am I actually doing this? If it's aligned with our core values, that provides some answers and some meaning to the question of why am I doing it? Okay, just a reminder for those of you who came in now. See, Daneo and Avisha just asking about the recording. Yes, there is a recording. It is being recorded right now. There will be recordings available. Kavita Devi, empathy. Yeah, that's the core value indeed. And that comes down to connection with people and relationships, I'm sure, as well. Okay, thank you for the comments. Keep them coming. As I said, I'm going to try to keep an eye on the chat as we go, and keep everyone up to date. And I would again remind you there will be time for Q&A at the end, but I really do encourage any comments and questions as we go. If they're relevant, I'll definitely jump to them. Okay. So all of these things are important, and I think if I was to ask you at the beginning of this webinar, well, what is the value of goal setting, and why do you think it's an important thing, and would you rather be a good goal setter or a poor goal setter? I think everyone would say, well, goal setting is really important. Goals are important in our lives. We need goals, because if we don't have goals, we live a life that could feel directionless. We might not achieve what we want to achieve. I think people, we know these things, but for some reason that doesn't necessarily translate into actually achieving those goals. So this is an important question to ask then, is why do we find it so difficult to achieve our goals? What is going on here? And there's a number of reasons for it, which we'll try to cover as we go. But the basic one, when we set a goal initially, and that might be at the beginning of the year, it might be when you're setting a New Year's resolution, and these obviously have very bad reputations, don't they? New Year's resolutions, people don't take them very seriously. They're actually a little bit of a running joke. The New Year's resolution is almost it's almost agreed. We almost, we do it with a wink and a nudge and say, well, we set this New Year's resolution, but everyone kind of knows, well, by the time we get to maybe the end of February, it's going to be long forgotten. And that in itself is telling in its own way, right? So thinking about it differently is important. But when we set that goal, let's say at the beginning of the year, when we're on leave or holiday, around the holiday time, and we start thinking about goals and things we want, that's typically when we're at our most motivated. So our motivation levels are sky high. But as we get on with the process of living and juggling all the balls that we need to juggle in life and all the demands, and again, just trying to get through the day and get through the week, we often find that motivation decreases because it just starts to seem less important than it did when we actually set the goal. So that's quite a real phenomenon that happens. You can see that running and marathons are always analogies and metaphors that come up when we're speaking about goals, and that can be a bit cliched, but it's also quite helpful to think about these things because there's a lot of helpful parallels there between the two. If you decide to run a marathon, you probably more likely than not are thinking a negative feeling about yourself, or that's motivating in its own way, or you are observing a marathon. Maybe if you're in South Africa or KZN as I am, you see the Comrades Marathon every year. On that day, I think people's motivation to run it, if they're not running it, is the highest it'll ever be. What happens though is that you might decide on that day, well, this is really something I want to be involved in, and this is something I can speak for personally. I've had the same feeling very recently. Actually, the last marathon last year, the last Comrades Marathon, that feeling of just observing it and thinking, well, this is something I'd really like to do. I'd hate for another year to go by and I'm not doing it. And that motivation is powerful. But what we find is that by the time you get to, let's say, December, January, February, the process of waking up at 5 a.m. and going out for a 2-hour run, as one must do in a situation, is significantly decreased. And this is why we often find it hard to achieve our goals, because that motivation decreases over time. We'll speak a little bit more about motivation as we go. Okay. Another part of obstacles and barriers to goal setting is the fear of failure that I think everyone in some way can probably relate to. And this is, people have this on different levels and with different areas of their life, but it really is a very common thing, generally speaking, is we can have such a bad relationship with failure, and we can have such significant experiences that are painful where we have failed in our life, that we start to stop even setting goals. If that makes sense, start to stop. We can get to the point where we actually we're afraid to set goals because failing hurts. And you can see often this is linked to feelings of inadequacy and feelings of self-doubt that we can have, which again are very common for reasons that are beyond the scope of this workshop. But if you experience these things, you can rest assured you're not alone. If a person is feeling a sense of inadequacy, what that often means is that they feel quite a strong need to prove a point to people around them, and prove a point perhaps to people in their past, even though they're no longer there or no longer in their lives. And that can drive us, but it can also become this desperate fear of, if I don't succeed, then I won't be able to prove that point, and that'll say something about me, and that'll be very painful. So one of the defense mechanisms we use to prevent that feeling and that feeling of failure is actually just staying away from the process of setting goals at all. Because if I don't set a goal, then I can kind of just, again, autopilot it, and there's no feeling of, well, I said I was going to do this thing and then I didn't, and that feels terrible, and that feels like I'm now, not good enough. That's a very powerful dynamic as well, and one that, we'll get into in other webinars as well, again, to understand what's going on there in more details. Is definitely something we will cover in another workshop. So just one of the questions coming up. We'll get to the point of maintaining motivation. Shane, we are going to speak more about motivation as we go. Okay. And then a big one, we don't have the technical know-how of setting goals, and this is something we'll also come back to. We have to we set goals in ways that are unclear and unstructured. So, for example, we'll say something like, well, I want to lose weight, or I want to be more healthy, or I want to have more money, or I want to advance in my career. And these things are very, very unclear. And not only are they hard to measure if we actually are working towards them or if we've achieved them, and that affects motivation, the fact that we're not able to measure it, but also because because they're not specific, we also don't really know what we need to do to get there. And that can be really detrimental as well to our ability to achieve goals. If we kind of put out these very arbitrary, undefined objectives, that very much is linked to failure in goal setting. And then what we're going to cover in the next 10-15 minutes now is this dance between our psychology and our biology. And I'm wondering if you guys know what I mean when I say that. This dance between our psychology and our biology. Do you know the difference between those two? So our psychology is linked to our mind, the way we think, the way we feel, and it's the behavior that comes from that. That's our mind. If you think about our personality, things like motivation, who we are, that's linked to our psychology. Our biology is obviously the bodies in which we live, right? And these things are not two separate things, as much as those categories might make you think they are. They're very much enmeshed and intertangled, and our psychology is a function of our biology. Our thoughts are just relationships between our neurotransmitters, our neurons. Our feelings are just chemical processes that are happening in our brain, states that we have there. But likewise, our psychology also determines our biology. So if I think of something and that makes me afraid or stressed, I have a physiological reaction in my body as well. My heart starts to race, I perspire, my breathing shallow. I breathe more shallow. That is just this dance between our psychology and our biology, that they're not the separate things that we often describe them to be. This idea of body and mind. So what does that mean for goal setting? We'll cover two examples, and they're more than this, but just to give you a bit of a sense for how these things are related. So firstly, blood pressure, which might not be something that you would have typically thought is related to goal setting. This is how it's related. So for those of you who are aware of what blood pressure is, I'm sure you've heard of it. You probably think about it as a bad thing. You must have high blood pressure, and you're not completely wrong with that. And basically, it just measures the pressure in your vascular system. So your veins, your arteries, and how that's related to the pumping of your heart. And that's the heart over there, you'll see, which is slightly different from the heart emoji you might use from time to time. These are, again, things you probably know. But we can think about blood pressure as the two numbers that you would have heard, systolic and diastolic pressure. That just means when your heart is compressed and it pumps the blood around, and then when it is relaxed and the pressure decreases. So that's the kind of the two states that your vascular system would be in. Why this matters, you would expect to have some type of fluctuation, natural fluctuation in your blood pressure. And although, if you have a generally higher state of blood pressure, high levels of blood pressure, you're more likely to be at risk for certain types of disease and other negative things. Again, that is negative health outcomes, and that obviously is linked to stress as well. But what the research shows is that there is a very clear link between blood pressure and action. So when we are about to act, we have an increase in our blood pressure, and that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing, because that allows us to actually get up and act and do the thing that we need to do. And that's a very important part in achieving any goal, is the process of actually getting up. That the state of procrastination in many ways is the opposite of that, doing something different or doing nothing at all to what we actually feel that we would like to be doing, what we want to do. And there's good reasons for that too. So that increase in blood pressure is a very helpful way of getting us to do something. And that could be a cognitive task as well. It doesn't have to be necessarily physical behavior in terms of, well, I said that I was going to train for this marathon. How do I now get up off the couch and go put on my shoes and go run? It also could just be a cognitive task, which is something like, okay, well, now I need to start studying. Conversely, though, when we think about achieving the goal, there's actually a decrease in our blood pressure. So when we think about taking action as a step towards the goal, our blood pressure increases. But when we think about what that final outcome looks like, so I imagine myself crossing the finish line, my blood pressure decreases. So that's quite good for stress if you think about it. Having a decrease in blood pressure makes us feel more relaxed. But actually, it is counterproductive to doing what we need to do to achieve the goals. And that might sound like a bit of a conundrum, because then you think, well, what do I do with that? So the research on this is really interesting. It's been coming out in the last few years, but there's very clear link between blood pressure levels and goal-oriented behavior. So what does that mean for us? You can think about something like a vision board. You guys familiar with the vision board? This is very big in the goal setting community. You can see a version of one there, and it's also linked to the kind of motivational philosophies such as Secret, the power of attraction. You imagine the life that you have, you cut it out of a magazine, if you remember magazines, and you stick it on a piece of paper, or you do it digitally. It's just a way of imagining things that you want, visualizing the things that you want. The research has shown, though, that actually people who use vision boards are less likely to achieve their goals. And this raises interesting questions, right? I mean, you would think, well, this is a person who's taken the time to visualize their goals, to be mindful and conscious about what they want in their life. But for some reason, they're achieving their goals less than people who aren't using vision boards. And that's on aggregate. It doesn't apply to everyone, of course, but that's typically what the statistical trends are. So what this means and what it's showing is that the process of thinking about a goal is actually becoming counterproductive to our motivation. So if we spend too much time just visualizing the outcome, and more than that, actually telling people about the outcome, speaking about the plan, the goal itself, we're less likely to achieve the goal. This is because we often, the vision boards lack these concrete plans of action. We kind of think, okay, well, if I'm able to visualize this life, then I'm going to attract these things, perhaps, or it's going to happen. And of course, it tends not to. So this is also what the research shows, is that if you tell people your goal too much, so I'm studying my PhD, for example, or I'm doing my BCom, and if you tell people about that you experience this decrease in blood pressure just through that feel-good feeling of imagining what that'll be like when you have it. And the response you get from people as well, which would be, oh, well done, that's great, I'm so proud of you. These things are actually quite often demotivating, as opposed to what we would perhaps think intuitively is that they would be motivating. Okay. Yeah, right. So I'm enjoying your comments about vision boards. Nothing on the wall then, says Pumezo Steady, saying better to do a vision board in your head, too lazy to do cutting and pasting. Yeah, that is indeed a commitment. Great. Okay. So another aspect in terms of our physiology and our psychology, our biology and our psychology, our bodies and our minds, is this thing called dopamine. And I'm sure you've heard of dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter. A neurotransmitter is one of the chemicals that we have in our brains. It facilitates the communication between our neurons. There are a number of different ones. Serotonin is a different example of a neurotransmitter. Dopamine is often thought to be associated with reward. It's often called the reward neurotransmitter, but it has been shown quite effectively through recent research to be much more linked to motivation. So dopamine is about motivation. It is a feel-good neurotransmitter, though. What that means is that when we have those what we call dopamine hits, we feel this sense of well-being and a sense of ecstasy. And that is linked to motivation. And that can be quite a helpful way of building motivation and getting that increase in dopamine. The problem is that it can be used either way, and often what we find is that it can reinforce maladaptive behaviors as well. And this is observed a lot with social media. Every time you get that, you post a picture of yourself and then you get a notification, what you're getting there is a dopamine hit. So that your body's motivation system that's being hijacked by the social media algorithm. That's often where dependence starts to come in. So if we anticipate a pleasurable event, even if the event is not happening, if we just anticipate what that event will be like, we get this increase in dopamine. So it's a very complicated topic, and again, we could spend a lot of time in it. But the headline here is just to be able to understand that we can leverage this in adaptive or maladaptive ways. So what that means is we can get it to work for us, or we can get it to work against us. And if we get into the habit of doing things that are giving us these kind of cheap dopamine hits, we actually start to get less motivation. We start to procrastinate more. So we need to get into the habit of doing things that require some type of sacrifice, some type of delayed gratification. And this then can harness the power that dopamine has in allowing us to get into high states of motivation. Because again, the relationship between motivation and effective goal setting is a very clear one. Okay, so there's three fundamental steps you can think about in terms of setting your goals. I've given you some of the areas where you might fall short that might be problematic. There's three fundamental steps in actually setting goals. Firstly, we have to choose goals that are challenging, not too easy, not too hard. That's the balance. If we set goals that are too easy, to go back to the blood pressure, what we found is, well, what not we, but what the researchers found is that we tend to have no change in blood pressure. People who've been tested for this, if they set goals that are too low, what happens is their blood pressure stays fairly constant when they are, thinking about achieving that goal, which means that doesn't really give them the kick that they need. Likewise, a kick to get going, kick to get motivated. Likewise, goals that are too hard, we kind of have these narratives around it that this is unachievable, it's too scary, it's too big for me, and then we very quickly lose the way. So we have to set goals that scare us slightly. They have to be out of our comfort zone. It has to be something that stretches us and that feels like it would be an achievement, but it also has to be something that we can feel this is something that I can get to. And then number two, be very concrete in the process of planning. And this means a number of different things. You can create a timeline, for example, break it down into smaller goals, target date, milestones along the way as you go. It could be daily, weekly, monthly goals as you move towards the final goal. If your goal is I want to have, I want to by the end of the year have, let's go with the marathon again. I want to be able to run 20 kilometers by the end of the year. It's very much more likely you'll be able to do that if you break it up and say, okay, well, by the end of January, I want to be able to do 7 kilometers. So what does that look like? Well, on Tuesday, the 12th of, or whatever the date might be, what is today? Wednesday, the 11th. So by Thursday, the 12th, I want to be, going for a 4-kilometer run. On Friday, I want to be doing another 4. You get the point. By breaking it down, we have the step, we have the roadmap that we can actually use and we can rely on as we go, as opposed to just setting this goal that's in the future and then there's just this gap of, okay, well, I expect during that time I'm somehow going to get there. And you can see very easily how we can lose our way along that. So be concrete. Being concrete means specific. Write down exactly what it would take, write down what you're going to do. And even if it's on a day-to-day basis, and if it's shorter term than that, break up your day and how you're going to actually spend your day. Okay. And then the third step is foreshadow failure. So this means think about what failure might look like. So those are the 3 steps. I'm going to go into foreshadowing failure in a moment, but just very basically, set goals that you can achieve, but that are going to stretch you, but don't make them too easy. And then set concrete plans, and then foreshadow failure. Foreshadow failure, what that means is 2 aspects to it. Number 1, this is I suppose, the dirty secret, if you will, of motivation and goal setting, is that, again, for some of the reasons we've spoken about in terms of, things like motivation, neurotransmitters such as dopamine, the relationship between action, motivation, and our vascular system blood pressure, we are quite as effective at successful goal setting if we visualize failure. So what it might look like if I don't achieve it. This is something we have to be careful with, because if we let me put it this way, there's a significant link between emotional wellness and self-kindness, self-compassion. So being able to be kind to ourselves is very strongly linked with wellness, and wellness is obviously strongly linked with goal setting as well. But at the same time, if we're able to think about what it is that we're trying to avoid, and we can do this without judgment and we can do it without fear, but just a realization of it, this is actually quite an effective way of motivating ourselves. So if you are thinking about having that extra donut and your goal has been to set some health parameters and health metrics for yourself that you want to achieve, it's more helpful to think about what having that donut might do to you as opposed to what not having that donut might do to you, if that makes sense. So not having that donut, where you can kind of imagine, well, I might be really fit and healthy. That's somewhat motivating perhaps, but more motivating is what we would think about. The opposite of that would be, if I do have it, I might be unhealthy, and how is that going to feel? That can be quite a motivating technique, but we have to be careful not to leverage too much on fear, because if we're just using fear, that in itself can be detrimental to our mental health. So there's a balance there. And Nadim, you're bringing up a point there which is important. It's not about focusing on the negativity. It can, and this is why we have to be nuanced about it. Not about negativity, but it's about the realistic outcome of what might happen if we don't follow the tasks and the objectives that are set out for ourselves. And we can do that in a positive way. You can say, that's not going to say anything about myself or my value as a person. I'm not going to judge myself for doing it. However, there's a reason I have set this goal for myself. That's because at the end of the year, I want to have this degree as opposed to not having this degree. And so it's again about having the balanced look at it and the nuance there. Yeah. So the foreshadowing failure is about understanding what failure might look like and using that as one of the motivators that we have. It's also about understanding potential roadblocks. So knowing this is the goal I've set for myself, and these are the things that might get in my way. What would that look like? What do I know about myself that would mean it's likely that I'm going to find this difficult? What do I know about my own discipline and my own motivation levels? What do I know about my own lifestyle? What do I know about the distractions in my life? What do I know about the demands that are there on my time that are going to make achieving this goal difficult? And when we understand that, we're honest with ourselves about it, then we can say, okay, well, this is how I'm going to plan for that, or this is how I'm going to try control for these factors. And more than that, when or if these things happen, this is how I'm going to react. So I know that perhaps there's a time in the year that I'm going to get very busy, and that's going to coincide with these goals I've set for myself, these objectives, and achieving this broader goal. Should that happen, what is my contingency plan? How am I going to make this time available? What can I give up? And again, this is not necessarily focusing just on the negatives, but it's just about being realistic about what we are likely to face on these journeys. Yeah, Pumezo, you put it well there. I think celebrating before scoring a goal is sometimes dangerous. That's a big part of the physiology of it as well. That feeling of achievement is before we've actually achieved is it's counterproductive. But we can celebrate the successes along the way, which is slightly different. So if we set ourselves these little, we're breaking it down into little smaller goals, we can take a moment to reflect and say, well, that, I do acknowledge the work I put in. I'm proud of myself. I'm happy that I've got this far, but I continue. Okay. Just a few further strategies just on these points. Holding yourself accountable. And again, you can do this without judgment. Holding yourself accountable is not about blame. It's not about punishing ourselves or being unkind to ourselves. It's just about saying it is possible to create a culture of accountability in my life. And essentially what that means is if I say I'm going to do something, I do my best to do it. And I might not be perfect at that. I might not do it every time, but the better I get at that, the easier it is to do it, because that just then becomes my habit, becomes my practice. As opposed to saying I'm going to do something and then not doing it, it becomes easier to not do the next thing because it's just one thing and a whole bunch of other things that I haven't done. What does it really matter, right? As opposed to saying, well, these are the things that I said I'm going to do, and even though they're difficult, I'm going to pitch up, I'm going to show up, and I'm going to do them. And then the times that we don't tend to stand out more. They tend to be more notable, and that means we're less likely to just shrug our shoulders and kind of be complacent about it. Okay. Keeping accurate data on your progress. So we often have these subjective ideas of how we're doing. Sometimes we're too critical. Sometimes we are not realistic enough. It's about just saying, well, how am I really doing? How do I keep data on myself? We can do this just with a spreadsheet. Maybe track the hours that we're studying, if that's what it is, the hours that we're training, the hours that we're putting on, into any other type of behavior that we're putting into achieving a goal, just by actually, keeping a record of it. Then we can look back and analyze it. There's some really good apps as well you can get on your phone that actually work as kind of data collection tools and then data analysis tools on ourselves. So you can set them to ask you any question at any point. So if you want to track your mood, for example, you can say, okay, well, in the morning at 8 o'clock, I want you to ask me, how do you feel right now? And then I want you to do that again at 12, and I want you to do it again in the evening at 8. And then it will we'll answer. So your app will prompt you, how do you feel? You'll say, I feel good. Maybe at midday, you'll say, I'm feel low. Maybe in the evening, if I'm feeling really euphoric. And then that app will track all of that information, put it together, and for example, at the end of the month, you'll be able to get all these analytics of what your mood was like. You can do that with anything. You can do it with, the effort that you're putting into training or learning to play the piano. How do you think you did today? Whatever it might be, and that can be really helpful as well in correcting as we go and saying, okay, well, I'm actually doing a lot better at this than I thought I was. If I look at all these put in, I look at, I felt like I wasn't doing well, but actually I'm doing pretty well. That can be motivating. Likewise, we can say, well, I thought I was doing well, but actually I'm not really keeping myself accountable here. There's so many times I said I was going to do something and I haven't, and the data is showing me that. What can I do now to change that? Failure is important to in the learning process. So never failing, of course, means we never learn, we never grow. When things are easy, we tend to kind of stagnate. And there's a lot of lessons in failure. But if we fail too much, that in itself is demotivating, because then we start to just expect, okay, well, every time I do something, I'm going to fail. That feels too painful. Let me not even try. So just understanding, and again, having a relationship with failure that is a healthy one, which is to say, I will fail. That doesn't make me a failure. It just means that I'm a human being, and that's part of the process. And if I can take the lessons from it, and as they say in the modern lexicon, if you can fail forward, then failure can be a really, really helpful experience. And Sandro, you're asking about the actual app. I can't remember the app name, but I think you'll be able to find them quite easy if you were to Google it. If you're unable to find it by the end of the session, let me know and I'll have a look. I'll try to put it out there. Okay, Mohammed, I see your question. I'm going to leave that one to the end if I could. Just remind me if I missed it. But yeah, I see that in the Q&A. Thank you for that. Okay, good. So the basics before we go to a Q&A. What are we looking at here? Have lofty goals. So set goals that are going to be high enough that they're going to really push you, but make sure that they are paired with concrete strategies. So the loftiness of the goal needs to be paired with real basic, what am I going to do to achieve that? Finding the right degree of challenge in the goal, not too easy, not too hard, and then fall in love with the process. So much of any type of achievement is not focusing just on that achievement, because that can be really hard to sustain. We might be able to do it once or twice, but then we're always chasing something, right? And that kind of detracts from our ability to be present, which is such an important aspect of emotional wellness. And if we're able to fall in love with the process, we can say, well, the thing that I really want in my life, that I'm working towards, the goal that I have, I do really want that, but I'm going to find a way of really enjoying the steps that it takes to get there. And that doesn't mean that those steps are always going to be pleasurable, but we can find joy in the unpleasant as well. In fact, that's a really helpful life skill, is to say, well, the things that are hard, I can find meaning in them, and there can be some type of deep satisfaction in the process of doing them, and finding the things that we're grateful for in that process, and the things that we do enjoy, as opposed to just having this view on the finish line, which is far in the distant future. Leverage the power of habit. So we are creatures of habit, and that could be habits that are adaptive or maladaptive. So we might just have the habit of waking up and sitting on the couch for 5 hours. That's a very powerful habit. But if we're able to, again, create cultures of accountability and cultures of pitching up and doing the things that are hard, then that can be a really helpful way of creating a framework for doing the things that we need to do to get to where we need to be. And I don't want to paint this as you have to live kind of really Spartan, deprived life. But certain deprivations, certain delayed gratification can be really helpful. And again, if we can make those habitual, we become better at them. And if we can become better at delaying gratification, sacrifice, then we're more able to do the things that we need to do in the moment that are hard to do and that we'd rather not do, right? We'd rather procrastinate. Prepare for failure. So knowing that again, having a healthy relationship with failure, knowing that it is part of the process, knowing that sometimes we will fail, we can't achieve all our goals, that's not realistic. Knowing what might increase failure and being prepared for that and having plans around that. But again, setting goals that are not so hard that we're likely to fail. And breaking up your big goals into smaller goals. So the research has shown that when we're close to the goal, we tend to have a spike in motivation. We tend to be able to act more, tend to be able to do what we need to do more. When we're far from the goal, we tend to find it harder. And you can see this again in a race. If we're close to the end, that's often when people run faster. When they're still a long way away, they can start to lose their way a bit. Having smaller goals allows us then to harness that part of our neurology, which is to say, when we find that we're getting close, we tend to then start to get all of these biological assistances to actually pitching up and doing what we need to do to achieve those goals. And again, if the goal feels achievable, we're more likely to mobilize, we're more likely to act to achieve it. This is the narrative, it's the story that we have around it. If we can tell ourselves, this is a goal that is challenging, but I know that I can do it. I know I'm capable of it, and I know how it's going to feel when I get there. That then makes it more likely that we're actually going to do the work that we do. Okay, so guys, that is just a summary of goal setting and some of the things that get in the way and some of the ideas around motivation. And the basics of goal setting that might be helpful in that respect. I'm going to open it up to some questions. We have a few minutes for those. So let's get on to them. I'm going to go to Mohammed's question first. So how do you avoid negative energy through goal setting when people around think what you want to do is impossible? So that's important as well. Depending, right? I mean, you've always got to find personalized answers to these questions. But I can say in a very general sense, the more we love our own goals and the more we believe it's possible, the less we need other people to love them. The more we need other people to approve of them. Some of the greatest things that people have done are things that no one thought were possible, right? We have to believe it's possible. That's the point about making it feel like it's achievable, to have a narrative around that makes it feel achievable. But yeah, I mean that's an important part of it, is to say, well, other people are going to have opinions. Ultimately, what matters is what we know about ourselves and our own self-belief, and using that as our true north, if you will. I hope that answers your question. Jonathan, Mark Manson, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Expletive Deleted. I'm not sure if you know this book. What would your opinion be? So I do know it. I've never read it. And maybe in some ways that links back to Mohammed's question, right? Which is to say, how do we find our own path when other people around might feel like they're taking away from us? A question that most people never consider it. So I'm just going to kind of quote you here, Jonathan. Thank you. What pain do you want in your life? What are you willing to struggle for? Because that means to be a greater determinant of how our lives turn out. Yeah, I think that's really meaningful. I think that's really meaningful. Is struggle and the value in struggle, and because things mean more, don't they, when we've struggled for them? You see this all the time. I don't think this is new wisdom to anyone, but when we're just given something, it tends to mean less to us than when we actually work and bleed for it. And that's part of the process that we can learn to love as well. Thank you for those insights. That's really helpful. I'm just seeing if there are any more questions. I'm just jumping between the chat and the Q&A, so I'm hoping I don't miss anyone. Tomorrow, the presentation will be on YouTube. It'll be posted later this week, I believe. Thank you, guys. I think those are the questions. I'm just trying to see if I missed any. Thank you for your comments. It's been my pleasure. Okay, good. Guys, we're going to have more of these, more webinars on these types of topics. So I look forward to sharing with you again. And thank you very much for all of your participation and your presence. It's been really good. I've enjoyed it, and I look forward to the next time. So I hope that you are able to use some of these insights into setting really helpful goals. And I hope you're able to achieve the things that you need to, and the things that are important to you. And I wish you all the very best with all of that. So yeah, until the next time, thank you guys, and all the best.